Hi guys, we're just going to wait a couple more minutes as people come on in and then we can go ahead and get started. All right, we can go ahead and get started. Hi everyone, my name is Caitlin. Welcome pre-PA students and PA graduate students. In this session, we will be hearing from graduate students in Physician Assistant School about their experience applying and getting into graduate school and how their program is going for them so far. First, I would like to start off by introducing our graduate student panel. If you guys would each just like to individually say where you're at in PA school, what you majored in undergrad, and how it's going so far. Carly, would you like to start us off?
Sure. My name is Carly Marshall. I attend Des Moines University for PA school. Our program started back in May, so I only have about 3 months left of my didactic year and then a full year of clinical rotations ahead of me. I went to Iowa State. I'm from West Des Moines, and thankfully my parents are living here too, so I actually live at home during PA school, which has been a blessing during this COVID time. So.
Madeline, you want to go next?
All right. Hi, my name is Maddie. I go to UW La Crosse. I am also about 3 months from ending the didactic year and then a full year of clinicals coming up. In undergrad, I majored in biology and biochemistry. And in general, school is very busy, but it's going really well.
And Mackenzie?
I'm Kenzie. I also go to the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, and I went to Iowa State for undergrad. I majored in biology and minored in pharm and toxicology. And like Maddie said, yes, it's a lot, but it's definitely worth it and it's going well.
Hannah, you can go next.
I'm Hannah. I also go to UW La Crosse for PA school. I went to UWL for undergrad and majored in biology and minored in psychology. And yeah, we have 3 months left, like everyone's been saying. So we're kind of on the home stretch here, but starting clinicals in June.
And Christina?
Hi, I'm Christina. I go to Carroll University in Wisconsin. For undergrad, I went to Arizona State, and currently I am finishing up, like everyone else was saying, our first year PA1 students. Undergrad, I majored in biology.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but Yasasbi?
I go by Yash. I think that's
Okay,
that'll be easier for everyone. So my name's Yash. I go to the University of Iowa for PA school. I went to Iowa State for undergrad, and I majored in kinesiology. And then I took a gap year, and then now I'm at the University of Iowa. I finished my didactic year in December, and I just finished my first rotation, and I start my second rotation on Monday.
Thank you all for coming, and we're happy to hear from you all. To start us off, I'm going to have a couple of general questions for the panel, but students, feel free to drop any questions in the Q&A box, and we'll make sure those get answered throughout. My first question, what was the most beneficial class for PA school that you took as an undergraduate student? Anyone can answer.
I can start off. So I went to Iowa State and I took the cadaver lab. I think it's BMS 448. if that's still what it is, not positive. But I would definitely say that was the most beneficial. And also, since we were online, we took anatomy in the summer, so we didn't have the opportunity to work with cadavers, although like we have had the opportunity to go into the lab now. But I would definitely say going through regional anatomy, even though we didn't dissect as undergrad students, it was still beneficial. And I definitely like remembered a lot taking that my junior year. And then I didn't take a gap year, so going straight in to PA school, and then anatomy was one of the first classes, so that was super beneficial.
Yeah, while Mackenzie talks about that, I took that class as well here at Iowa State, and it was extremely helpful. Even with my gap year, I still remembered a lot of it going into the dissections and everything. And at the time, biochem was sort of kicking my butt, and I was able to pretty much stay afloat with my experience in anatomy. So that was really beneficial.
Some classes that I took that I think are helping me that aren't kind of like the conventional classes, like everyone takes the same like biology types of classes and chemistry and that. I took some really interesting psychology classes, which I think have kind of helped me with the personal aspect of things, and just kind of remembering that everything in medicine ties back to the patient and like we're all people at the end of the day. So I think I took like a human sexuality class. I took a death and grieving class, which I think both of those I learned a lot from them, and I'm kind of like applying those still throughout. So
Yeah, for me, sorry I didn't say my major before, but I went to Iowa State and I was kinesiology as well and have a minor in gerontology, so the study of aging, and a lot of those classes have really helped me. We haven't hit our geriatrics unit yet. That should be in the next like month or so, but I think those classes will really help me there. But being kinesiology, you kind of get to choose from, you know, like 9 credits of certain classes your senior year, and one of my favorites was neuro. I can't remember the name of it, with Dr. Smiley and Dr. Stegmuller. They did a fantastic job going through neuroanatomy and kind of neuroscience. It's probably the hardest class I took at Iowa State, but definitely the coolest when it came to our last unit of anatomy was all neuro anatomy, and then we'll have a whole neuro unit this spring as well.
I felt like taking biochemistry for me was really helpful. I remember seeing it wasn't required by a lot of schools, but it was a recommended class. And I felt like it has given me a really good background now that our class is starting pharmacology. So it's nice to have a little bit of a background, so it's a little easier.
Perfect. Thank you guys for that. It's definitely helpful for an undergraduate student when picking out their class schedule. My next question is, how did you prepare for applications? What do you think helped you stand out, and what's your biggest advice when applying?
something that I wish I would have done earlier on would have been to like write down patient experiences and contexts that you've had, even if it's volunteering or at your jobs, and like write down when those moments happen and you're kind of like, oh, this is kind of why I want to be a PA. Like you're going to be telling a lot of these stories when you're in interviews, you're going to be writing about them in your personal statement or in your other general essay questions. So I think just like kind of taking note and keeping track of like, even if it's, they want to know like good things, they want to know bad things, they want to know things you wish you would have done different, done better. So I think kind of just keeping track of those like, contexts and experiences will make the application process a lot easier.
Yeah, going off what Hannah said, I actually kept a spreadsheet of everything that I did. Even like after I shadowed, I would just jot down a few things of like what happened that day, what I really liked about whether it was the PA or like the specialty they worked in, different things like that. And then also for applying, I definitely started my personal statement super early because I'm pretty bad at deciding. I think I probably wrote like 10 different personal statements and still couldn't decide what I wanted to submit. So I would definitely like start that early, and then also always think about contacting references sooner rather than later. I contacted all my references, I want to say probably like 3 months before CASPA opened. And I just like informed them like, hey, this is what I'm planning on doing. And a lot of them have already written like letters of rec for other PA students. So I just said, if you just want to have this, like if you have time now, go ahead, write it now. And then I will send it to you as soon as it opens April 27th. And then obviously I sent it to them. And I think that just gave them like a heads up. And that also shows that like you're on top of everything, which is super good. But yeah, I would just reiterate, like, definitely document now. It makes everything a lot easier later.
I would agree with Mackenzie and just saying that it helps to, if depending on what you're doing for PCE, to have like a spreadsheet of all your certifications as well, because sometimes those get lost. So if you have like your BLS, ACLS, PALS, anything that you may have, you can write down like the expiration date, your number for it, and just have those all in a nice spreadsheet so you can quickly put those in.
Another tip that I kind of figured out when I was applying, I took a gap year as well between undergrad and PA school and worked. That's where I got most of my patient care experience hours. I worked full time as a patient care tech on an orthopedic floor here in West Des Moines. But one thing I would do, is just to make sure you're writing down contacts, phone numbers, really emails. You're going to need all of that for the CASPA, and it's kind of awkward to go back and find those later. So definitely, I would, if I could go back like from freshman year, I would start that spreadsheet and just continuously add to it. And like Hannah said, you think you remember certain experiences, but 4 years of them put together, like definitely jotting down a few words or like what you learned, what lessons you learned during that time is for sure important, as well as CASPA is really cool. It's I thought it was an easy system to use. It's like our centralized process for applying, and you can actually create an account way before you even want to apply, like the year before, and you can start inputting your classes and your credits, and that's kind of a time-consuming process. CASPA, you can pay for them to do it too, but you can do it yourself just as easily. It just takes quite some time. So that's something you can do the year before you actually apply, and then you can like copy and paste it into your current application cycle. So that's what I did, and I thought that helped me with time as well, because that's one thing you can kind of start on in undergrad more than your personal statement or your like faculty letters of rec and stuff like that.
Yeah, everything everyone said is definitely true. Before applying and starting the process, make sure all the schools that you're going to apply to, you know what all they require and all the requirements, because each school is going to do something different. Some schools may require 3 letters of rec, some schools may require 4, and each school might require a letter of rec from a different person. So try and have all of those things written down and know your plan before you start. The other thing I was going to say is as soon as CASPA opens, really just like put everything in, like have it ready once the date opens. I think it opens sometime in April, and then try and submit it as soon as you can. I know there's a couple schools I applied to that I didn't get an interview for just because even though I submitted before their due date, they have rolling admissions and they weren't taking any more interviews. So make sure to submit those applications as soon as they're done and well before the deadline.
Thank you. That's great to know, especially about the interviews. What do you wish you knew before going into graduate school?
I'm gonna start real quick. As I said earlier, the anatomy was helping me keep afloat for biochem, and I wish I knew how much biochem I was going to get into. At Iowa State, I think I took the principles of biochem, which is like the 300 level course, and that was not nearly enough for the amount of biochem that we were going over. It might be a little different at the University of Iowa because we were taking a class with the med students. So we were like learning all the stuff they need to know for step 1, which I don't need to know, but it was, I found that tough, and I wish I took a harder biochem class in undergrads to better prepare me for grad school.
Yeah, just a different point of view. DMU, we don't have a biochemistry class. So I took just the principles of biochem at Iowa State, and we have little things like the urea cycle and little Krebs cycle things thrown in there every once in a while, but it's definitely not a huge emphasis in our program. So you'll see that different from any school you apply to as well. But for me, one thing I wish I knew was just, yes, it's going to be hard, and it's, you work 4+ years to get to this point, but it's also such a huge pivotal point in your life to like grow as an individual, not just a student. But I was elected president of my class, so I get to lead kind of 49 other students through this crazy COVID time. And I've grown a lot in my leadership roles and kind of my professionalism with talking to faculty, especially we have to do it all over email. So that's just a whole different ballgame as well. But also you have enough time to still create relationships outside of PA school. I have a significant other, I live with my family, and I do not feel like those relationships have been like, put on the back burner. I still feel like I have enough time to hang out with them, give them the attention they need, but also create new friends in PA school. I've found like 10 people that I absolutely adore, and we hang out either through Zoom or through when we have in-person lab and stuff like that. And definitely there's enough time for social aspect, and I was not expecting to have that time.
I would say it's kind of like a balancing act. And I think you have to remember, like in undergrad, you were also juggling like volunteering, having a job, being in clubs, participating, whatever else you were involved in. And now, like, you're able to take this 2 years and like, this is your like priority. This is your, like, your school is your job now. So it's kind of like, you're doing school, but also there's only so much school you can do before you're like, I need to like watch a movie tonight, or like, I need to take tomorrow morning off. Like, I try to take Friday nights off because I know I'm going to study most of the weekend, and kind of things like that. You'll kind of start to figure out, but it's just kind of like less pressure. I remember being very nervous about like, how am I going to make this work? But you're not having all the other pressures on you as well. Like, I don't have to worry about what my work schedule is. I'm not working. I'm not volunteering. Like, we do some volunteering, but not like regular every week type of things.
Yeah, one thing that I would say that I wish I knew, like in undergrad, obviously you want those A's, like that's what you're striving for. And that's what's gonna, I mean, it will assist you in getting into PA school. Obviously, it's just a number's a number. But especially in PA school, like that 100-question test or 50-question test, like those aren't like the only things you're going to see in practice. You're going to see a bunch of other things in the things like that you did remember, everything like that. So you can't take everything in. You're not going to know everything right away. And it's just like a growth process throughout the program and also like throughout your entire career. Healthcare changes all the time. So you're not going to know everything. And I think that's something that a lot of us have come to the realization of, I'm sure. But yeah, compared to undergrad, it is different. Someone has to be the high in the class, someone has to be the low in the class. Average is great. As long as everyone passes, that's all that matters. So yeah.
You learn
Thank
a lot
you.
more than what you get tested on. Like, you learn like this and you get tested on this. So it's really okay if you didn't know some of these, because you know a lot of this.
Thank you guys, that really put it into perspective. We do have one question in the Q&A box. It says, when it comes to letters of recommendation, how did you go about contacting references and asking them to write their letter of reference?
I just went up and asked them, I guess, if that's kind of the answer to that. You can just ask people you work with or professors that you have. And I've heard that some students, if like you want a professor that you know you're not going to see for a couple of years, if they were a freshman or something when you took them, you can ask them to write the letter of recommendation and like send it to you so you can save it or something. And then when it comes time for CASPA, you could send it back to them, have them make whatever revisions they feel are necessary, and then they can submit it. So that way it's not a few years later that they're trying to write this letter for you.
That's a good point. I do have something to ask on top of that. For your PA recommendation, was it just someone that you shadowed or did you know them personally?
Both. My route was a little more non-traditional. So I was a medic for a while before going back to PA school. So I had some references from my work. So it was people like physicians I worked with or my field training officer, and then some instructors from school.
For me, I actually didn't get a PA one. I shadowed PAs, but I did not have as close of a relationship to them as I did with DO. at Broadlawn's ER that I've spent like over 100 hours with. She was just more of like a friend at that point and knew me personally a lot well. So I went and asked her for a letter of rec. And I think that was more beneficial just because she knew me more as a person and not, just the 8 hours I spent with her type of thing. But like Yash said, I applied to one school that needed 4 letters of rec. So I got 4, one of them being that doctor, one of them being my research professor at Iowa State, Dr. Stegmoller, one being for gerontology minor, you have to do an internship. So I I volunteered at Green Hills Retirement Community and taught water aerobics classes. So the wellness director there. And then I was a member of a sorority and I ran sorority recruitment at Iowa State. So I spent a summer giving presentations to incoming members, and the director of Greek affairs wrote me one. So mine were a little like different than I would say most people's are, but they were just people that I had more of a personal relationship with rather than like checking a box that, oh, I got a PA. I just would rather find someone different.
Yeah, going off what Carly said, I think knowing the person better is definitely the best way to pick someone. I also didn't have a PA write me a letter of rec. I had an MD and then a few, so I had 5 in total, but I think the most important part is the relationship you have with them. Like, for example, I was doing research at Iowa State and I had the opportunity to have the PI of the research write the letter for me, but I had only talked to him like twice, so I didn't feel like he could really speak on my behalf. So I had the person who was in charge of the lab write the letter for me, and I think that really helped because she worked with me all the time. I got feedback from her, I gave her feedback, and she knew exactly the work I did instead of the PI who had seen me like twice. So definitely have a good relationship with them. It's not always just the hierarchy or the name. So.
I do want to mention too, I know it can be hard like to find a PA or a doctor that you have a good personal relationship to. So I had a doctor that I shadowed for 8 hours write one of my reference letters and it was fine. I just tried to supplement with my other recommendation letters with people I knew more personally. So instead of my manager that I never really talked to, I had one of the nurses that I worked with a lot write a letter for me. So like you don't have to have all of them people you know really well and just try and find a balance.
Yeah, I also had to ask a PA who I only shadowed for like 8 hours. And she was great. Like I did ask her and contact her throughout kind of undergrad and like asked her random questions about like being a PA and stuff because she gave me her contact info. So it wasn't that I only talked to her that one time, but obviously it wasn't as ideal. But it is hard to make those connections if you don't already have like a family friend or someone. I would also say that if you're able to, if you have a professor you knew you really liked and you wanted to ask them earlier on, I would say like just trying to kind of keep tabs with them too throughout your undergrad would be nice, even if you just like stop by their office for a while and like have a like short little conversation and see how things are going, because that really helps with like your rapport with them. Yeah.
Perfect. Those are all great. I know it's like kind of a stressor for a lot of students to find a PA, especially if you don't have that personal connection. We do have a couple more questions. In undergrad, how did you get your shadowing experience? And how many hours would you say is like a good amount to be competitive?
So in undergrad, for me, my dad's a financial advisor here in West Des Moines. So he just has a variety of clients in all different workforces. So I was shadowing, you name the medical profession, I was shadowing it, which was awesome, a good opportunity for me. But I also reached out to like your own doctor and your own dentist and your own eye doctor and your own physical therapist, like anyone you've ever had as a health provider for yourself. They already know you, and it's a really good opportunity to shadow them as well, since you see them on the daily there. But most of my shadowing hours came from contacts from my dad, or like my mom randomly doing Pilates with someone who's a PA or an MD, like just random little connections like that. So I also know a lot of people that just sent letters to places and asked if they had PAs that worked there. A lot of my classmates did that as well. So I think that's where a majority of our shadowing hours came. I would say I had a lot of shadowing hours, but DMU doesn't require specific amount of PA shadowing hours or anything, but for direct patient care experience, DMU requires 750, which is your shadowing hours can be included in that, which is kind of confusing. Like Yash said, every single school is very different. We all use a centralized process, but they're all very different when it comes to what their hours consist of. Like, does a scribe count? Does, you just have to check the websites when you're applying to these things. But for me, leaving undergrad, I probably only had about 300 to 400, somewhere in there, hours of just working summers in between as like a CNA and like volunteering with people with Parkinson's disease through my research at Iowa State. So I felt the need to take a gap year to be competitive, and a gap year, a full working year is about 2,000 hours. So I think I got around 1,800 added to there. And I felt like that was pretty competitive for coming right out of undergrad and taking a gap year. Like Madeline said, Christina, I think said you were a medic first. So some of your classmates will have like a lot of hours, and some will have 750, and that's it. So it really is very different depending on the school, and kind of as long as you hit that minimum, if you have other parts of your application that you feel are strong that can kind of balance that out, that's definitely important.
Yeah, off of what Carly said, I only had about like 40 hours of actual shadowing, but I felt my stronger portion of my application was my PCE. So I was, like she said, a medic for a while. So if you need to like boost up your application, I might shadow more, because then it gives you experiences to pull on when they ask you questions of like, when did you reach an ethical dilemma, or what would you do in this scenario? If you feel you don't have as much in another area, the shadowing might be a way for you to pull up experiences and show your interest and your enthusiasm for PA.
I do have a question to spin off of that. So would you say it's not as important to just have shadowing hours from PAs, or just like in the healthcare field, just to show that you explored other options?
I would say both. Like, you do want to shadow PAs because you want to prove to them, like, hey, I've been following this person and I have decided this is what I want to do. But also, I think it also looks great if you do shadow, whether it's DO or I rode with paramedics for, I think I did like a 24-hour shift with paramedics. So I think that's also a really good idea too, because if you think about it as well as a PA, you're gonna be on a team anyways. So to know where they come from, like what their thought processes are, is super beneficial. And then also just, again, to prove that, hey, I shadowed this, but I definitely still have decided PA is the route for me.
I would
Also,
think it's to prove to yourself this is what you want. Like, it's a very competitive application. School is not easy. Like, it's a lot of work. And the last thing you want is to realize, during all of this crazy school or whatever, that maybe it's not for you, which is an okay thing. But you want to shadow and really get that sense of, oh my gosh, I can't wait to do this. I love this job. This is it. This is what I want to do. So that's kind of also a great reason to shadow.
Also, you're definitely going to be asked in an interview why not an MD, DO, or why not an NP. So it's kind of nice to pull from those experiences and be like, oh, I did get to shadow both. I didn't personally shadow both, but I worked at an urgent care as an EMT. And so I got to work with like nurses, NPs, PAs, and MDs. So I kind of got like the whole teamwork perspective. So I feel like that kind of helped. And I would say too, since we're in a pandemic and it's probably really hard for you guys to find shadowing stuff right now, I would like maybe contact the schools if you're having an issue and just see what they're like kind of doing with it. Like when I was applying, I called schools and emailed them all the time when I was confused. Like they were all super, super nice and very like, you're wondering if this class counts for this or whatever kind of questions you have. I got like a lot of really great responses. But I can see how this would be really hard this year. So I'm wondering if they might be a little less like stringent on it, I guess. Hoping.
I know I have seen a couple schools where they're like kind of giving you like a pass for this, but and there's like virtual shadowing options as well. We have another question. Did everyone get accepted in their first year of applying, and what kinds of clinical experience hours did everyone have? I guess we kind of already covered the second one, but the first one, like basically just how the application process went.
I did get accepted. This is my first year. I did just graduate from undergrad, or I just graduated in undergrad in May and then started in May. I think I had like a week off. I worked as a caregiver. I didn't actually have my CNA, but I worked as a caregiver at a group home and in-home care taker as well. And then I worked as an EMT. So that's kind of like my background for patient care.
Yeah, I also got in my first cycle as well. I applied to 10 programs. I don't know what the average is of how many they all applied to, but I applied to 10. I thought that was a good number for myself after kind of figuring out locations and where I wanted to be. But as I get to know my classmates more, a lot of them have applied multiple times. Like some of my best friends, it was like their third time applying, which just like, kudos to them for sticking through it and applying over and over again, because you can really tell that's exactly what they want to do with their lives. So it's kind of cool when you get to BA school, your classmates all have different experiences. Not everyone is the same as you. Everyone has a really unique backstory as to how they got there. And that was definitely something I discovered it was not as easy for everyone didn't get in their first go round.
I personally did get in. This was my first time applying, but I took 2 years off between undergrad and now to really kind of feel prepared and like feel like I met all the requirements before I applied.
I also got in my first time, but that was because of my gap year, and I'm almost positive about that. I don't think if I applied at the end of my undergrad, I would have gotten in. So taking that gap year really helped. As far as the clinical experience question, I don't think I touched on it, but I worked as a nursing assistant in or CNA at Mary Greeley for the 2 years, so about 2.5 years of my undergrad. And then in my gap year, I worked at the University of Iowa hospitals as a nursing assistant as well. And so I think that was like a big reason why I was able to get in, because my grades weren't that strong, but I think I had like 3,000 patient care hours by the time I applied. So I had worked a lot, and that really helped my application. So if you know you're not strong in one area, make sure to buff up the other areas.
Yeah, I also got in my first round. I think I applied to about 7 schools. And then, yeah, okay, anyways. And then my patient care, I haven't touched on that yet, but I actually also worked at Green Hills as a CNA for 4 years. I started my freshman year of college, and then I took a certified medication aid course. So then I passed meds there, and then I was also a caregiver for a woman with Down syndrome. But yeah, I think I racked up probably about like 2,000 hours throughout my undergrad because I worked crazy hours. Not ideal, but it was only temporary, so it's okay. Yeah, but like Yash was saying, just try and be well-rounded. Like if you think you're struggling in one area, like he said, like bump up another. And obviously grades are just a number, the GRE, just a number, 100%. And like if you're personable, if you volunteer, like you have the experiences and like are prepared for interviews, you know that you want to go to that school, like take your time. If you don't get in your first time, it's okay. I know there's people that haven't. And like you coming back and you asking like, hey, how can I improve my application? Especially if you call that school and ask, they will tell you. They'll tell you like what you're lacking. And then throughout that next year, while you're waiting for the next cycle to open, definitely work on that. And then they will take that into consideration as well, because you took their input in and like you were applying it. So that proves to them that like you want to be there, you want to be a PA.
I would say different schools put emphasis on different things as well. Like I know certain schools focus more on grades, certain schools focus more on patient experience. So you just kind of have to figure out where you're going to fit in and make sure you look at all those requirements ahead of time. And you're going to find a place where you will fit in. It might take a little longer, and you just kind of, if you really want to do it, like you definitely can do it. Like it is doable. I think one piece of good advice I did get, which people might like have different perspectives on, when I was a freshman in undergrad, was like your grades, grades in PA school are pretty important, and you can always work more later on. You can always take a gap year and fill in those hours, but you can't retake these classes, and you can't, like, there's only so much. You kind of really have to focus on making like grades in school your priority. And it is kind of hard because you do want to volunteer and you do want to get working. And I started earlier by working like every other weekend, which was like perfect for me. And then I kind of like picked it up as I got used to college. But I would say you can't retake classes. You can always work more, and kind of like letting yourself know that you do have time.
Going off of that too, so when I graduated, I had 0 hours of patient care experience. I hadn't started working at all, and that's why I took the 2 years. And looking back on it, I wouldn't have done it any different. I don't think I would have enjoyed working while I was in undergrad, so I liked the way that it worked out. So there's a lot of different ways to do it.
One general tip I would like to give you guys, I don't know how far along the application process you are, but when you're looking at schools, almost every school on their website has like a list of the average amount of things that each applicant has that joined that school. So it's like our average applicant had this many hours of patient care experience, this GPA, this GRE score, and all that stuff. So make sure you're looking at that at the school and looking for that on the websites to see sort of what how your stats are compared to the ones of people who got in, because that will really help gauge how competitive of an applicant you are.
I have another question for you guys. How did you prepare for interviews, and what advice would you give to someone who's applying right now?
Yeah, so PA school interviews are interesting. Every single school does them so differently. Like I did ones that were group interviews. I did ones that were traditional, like 2 faculty, 1 student interview. And then there's also this fun interview called the MMI, which is like I can't remember what it's called. I know Iowa does it, Yash, but I can't remember what it's called. But it is like pretty much you have, a minute to read something on outside of the door, and then you go in and like present information, usually about ethical cases. So the MMI interview, I interviewed at Iowa, and that was definitely the most preparation. I actually Facebook messaged Josh about it like a year ago because I know his younger sister, but I didn't know how to prepare for that one. Traditional interviews, I've done those throughout undergrad for certain leadership positions, so those didn't have me too worried. But the MMI, just looking up the 4 ethical principles and how to kind of interpret different ethics cases. Like we actually just had an ethics OSCE last week, which is our standardized patient encounters through Zoom, and it was about a patient coming in and had terminal cancer and wanted a prescription to end their life and how to deal with that. So sometimes like the interview questions will get kind of intense, but some will be really fun and silly as well. So it's just kind of depending on the school. Like DMU's interview was a traditional style, 2 faculty, 1 student, half an hour long, super chill. While some other schools I had were group interviews, like building blocks together. Like it is just different for everyone. But I would reach out to any current PA students. We're all a great resource for our schools if you're applying to our schools, because they're different for every single school. So anyone can add any more, but.
For prepare, I did one of the like mock interviews, which I thought was helpful because it just got me over the initial jitters of doing it. And like, okay, I've heard, not that you've heard those questions before, but it's always the first one that's kind of nervous. So doing a mock interview as the first thing was helpful. And then I'd say film yourself. Everyone probably has odd things they do or say when they're nervous and they don't realize they're doing it, such as like if you pull your hair behind your ear, you should put your hair up. Then you don't fiddle with it. Or if you say the word like or a lot, sometimes just filming yourself, you can really get to see how you are presenting yourself, whether it comes across confident, nervous, or whatever.
So I got a book called How to Ace the Physician Assistant School Interview. And I read that, and it just had some good like tips and like ways to approach things. And it had like some common questions. And then I made like flashcards of what the common questions were. And then on the back, I just had like some of the main points that I wanted to try to make sure to incorporate for just like the questions of like, what is a weakness, or when have you made a mistake? The kind of questions that you tend to see a lot. And I would review those on the way to the interview just to try and help keep myself calm by like, yes, I do know what I'm talking about. Like it's still there.
Yeah, going off what Maddie said. So a lot of these interviews, like you're going to be driving for, you're going to be in a hotel the night before. So definitely like take the time to relax, but also in the car, I would just talk to myself. I'm sure people were like, oh, what is this woman doing? But that's besides the point. And then, yeah. Also just to prepare. So I know Christina, you brought up like mock interviews. I actually asked my letters of rec. I was like, hey, would you be willing to do this? And they're like, of course. So they just have an open interview, and like any professor, I'm sure at Iowa State, if you would ask them, they would be willing to do that. And then just another, I think this is a little off topic, but research the school before you go to the interviews, because they'll ask you like, why do you want to go to our school? Like, why not a different school? And you want to be prepared. You don't want to be like, oh my gosh, like, I don't know, I'm in this random state, random school, not really sure. Like that doesn't look good. And then also be prepared to like ask them questions, because they're interviewing you just as much as you are interviewing them as a school.
Going
your-
on. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Hannah.
I was just gonna say, know your answers to like, why do you want to be a PA? Why not MDNP? Why here? Those are like the big ones. Tell me about yourself. That one is a rough one. You think it wouldn't be, but it is. So those are the ones you just kind of like practice. Tell them to your friends, your parents, make them ask you. But like you also don't want to sound too rehearsed at the same time. So it's kind of like a balance between that. I don't know if Iowa State has this, but we have like resources at UWL where they had specific advisors that would do mock interviews for you and like review your personal statement and stuff like that. So I'd recommend that as well. But we also did a mock interviews with the current PA students at the time when I was applying. So that also helps a lot.
I wanted to go after what Mackenzie said about researching school, and Hannah as well. What did you look for specifically in schools that you applied to, and how did you decide which one you wanted to attend?
I feel like
I really wanted a small class size, so that way you get to know everyone and you know your professors. I also really wanted it focused on primary care, and the idea that like your professors were there for the PA program. Sometimes some other schools were so huge that the professors had other obligations and it seemed like it was a bit challenging to get a hold of them. So that's what I looked for.
Yeah, I kind of went off of like location. I didn't really want to leave like the Midwest. I actually grew up in Wisconsin, like 20 minutes from UWL, but went to Iowa State and then came back. And then also I would go based off of our program has, and a lot of programs do, they have like PA as like active PAs as faculty members, which I think is really nice. And a lot of our faculty says, like, we're going to treat you professional because you can potentially be our coworkers in 2 years. Like you will be side by side with us. So I really liked that aspect.
So I sort of first based it off location. I sort of figured out how far I was willing to go away from home. I grew up in Iowa as well. And then I sort of then filtered by how big the class was, what the cost was definitely something I thought about. And then how competitive the school was and like how I faced that. So I know it might have been UWL or there was another school in Wisconsin I just couldn't even apply to because they required like some like 3.85 or 3.9 GPA, and I was like, okay, well I don't have that, so I'm not gonna be able to get in there. But so sort of figure out what's most important to you. Location was probably one of the things that was most important to me, so I sort of focused on the Midwest and then filtered by the rest of the stuff I wanted.
Going off of that too, as far as location, if there's an area you know you want to move to or work in, it might be beneficial to go to school there just because you can build those connections through your clinicals to then get a job afterwards as well. So I would look at like what they have for clinical situation too.
Yeah, for me, location was huge for DMU just because I can live at home and save that money because PA school is expensive, but cost was a factor as well. But a reason I chose DMU was the interprofessionalism of our school. It's a med school, it's a podiatry school, it's a PT school, as well as other master's programs. So we have a lot of classes that are combined with those other programs and a lot of IPE events throughout our 2 years, our first year on campus, a couple throughout our clinical year, but also I liked DMU because they just emphasize wellness a lot, like not just your, your smartness or your intellectual health, but also your physical health, your emotional health. They provided counseling services that they talked about during my interview, as well as they have a gym on campus that you can pre-COVID have a +1. So like my boyfriend could go there for free, and it just felt like it kind of fit into my life really well at the time, being able to live at home and kind of supporting my loved ones around me.
I think you
We
also
do-
get a vibe. Sorry, I always cut you
You're
off.
fine.
So
It's
I think
okay.
you also get a vibe when you go to the interview. Like I remember like actually being able to go to the interviews, like walking into the building and like getting a sense of how the staff, like what they were like and like how they were interacting with us. And I think that makes you kind of get a feel for like, would I fit in here? Do I like it here? So
Might be a connection issue, but we do have one last question that I'm gonna try to squeeze in so that this person can have a question answered. For those of you who took a gap year or two, when did you apply for graduate school?
So I took the 2-year gap and I applied the year after I graduated. So when CASPA opened up in the spring, about a year later, that's when I applied. And then UWL starts in the spring. So I started a year after I applied. So that's how I got the 2 years in there.
Yeah, as far as timeline, it's usually you apply and then your school starts a year later because CASPA will open in April. And then most programs start the following year. So you should have all the hours you want by the time you hit submit on that CASPA because you can't change it. So even though you would probably be working for that year while you're waiting to hear back for acceptance, it won't count towards your total hours, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I would just make sure to check out CASPA and follow the timeline. It's very hard to like speak about it and kind of explain it, but once you see dates, it kind of makes more sense. But to take the gap year, just one gap year, I applied pretty much when I was graduating Iowa State. So within those months, it opened in April. I submitted the end of June. So I took a little bit there to get everything settled down. But like Yash said, there's rolling admissions for programs, which means like DMU is one of them that they just interview as those applicants come in and they fill up their classes. Those applicants come in. I'm not sure about your other programs, but some schools will wait until like January to tell all the students at one time that they came in. So definitely keep a lookout on that hopeful spreadsheet you're going to make so you kind of can compare all the schools and figure out when the best time for you to submit that CASPA application is.
And I was going to say too, I liked having the 2 years so that when I was applying, I didn't have to worry about any of my like senior classes or undergrad. Like I was just working. And so I could really focus that winter on like gathering all of the things I knew that I would need to put into the CASPA and like writing my personal statement and stuff. So I personally liked having more time and freedom to prepare by taking another year.
One more. So my process was very similar to Carly's. I graduated and then like maybe a month or 2 later, so June, July, I submitted my application. That was my senior year. But I was going to say the other thing, there's a couple things to consider. There's schools often have multiple applications. So you're going to submit your CASPA once, and then the school is going to probably send out a secondary thing, and then maybe even like a tertiary thing. So like, just like be aware that like once you submit, you still have to wait you have to wait a couple weeks for it to get verified. And then you have to wait a couple weeks for the school to get it. And then they send you another application and then you fill that out. And so just like give yourself ample time before the deadline to do that. I know I said that already. The other thing I was going to say is I know some schools will, in their secondary application, they'll be like, what are you doing if you're not going to school and things like that. So that's like where I put in my gap year, like I was like, well, I'm not in school right now, but I'm actively working, still getting patient care hours in between that time. So that's definitely something that a lot of schools will ask about. So make sure you have an answer, even if you're not doing anything, like have some answer ready.
I also don't want to scare you away. Like I didn't I'm gonna be honest, I did not open CASPA until I graduated. Like, I knew it opened in April, and I was like, first of all, everyone goes on it the first day it opens and it crashes anyway, so the second day. But I told myself, like, okay, I'm finishing my senior year, I'm finishing finals, you're in the midst of finals. I'm like, I'm gonna take this. And then I took a couple days off. I opened up CASPA. I worked on it like a lot for those first couple of weeks. Honestly, the thing that took me the longest was the personal statement, just because you revise and revise so much. But everything else doesn't take like really that long, because it's kind of exciting. So you just kind of start going, and then before you know it, you've been working on it for like ever. And it was doable. Like, I would say I also had to like go to interviews my senior year in undergrad, and like all of that was very doable. Like, it sometimes wasn't as ideal, and like, yeah, you had to take time away, but like you can do it if you want to apply.
Perfect. Thank you guys for sharing your interview process. We're just coming up to an end of our session. So I wanted to thank you all for taking time today and giving us some useful information that we didn't know before. And your thoughtful answers to our questions were very helpful. Students, if you would like to click on the link that I'm going to paste in the chat, it's just the website link for you to go to the next session. Just going to paste it quick. Thank you guys all for coming, and I hope you guys have a good rest of your day. Bye.
Good luck, guys.